Hello! I've just read chapter 12 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So, Trevor, Solace and the remaining Arrays members, with the exception of Dex, are coming up to Don Tamo. And we learn that Dex are pulled in a major favour to give them modified Arc 170, to give Solace, Keats and Trevor a modified Arc 170 Starfighter, and Olian and Cullen a modified Jedi Starfighter. And they're approaching Don Tamo, so they're not doing any communications, because, of course, even if they do scramble the communication, they just didn't want Imperial scouts to pick up anything. Not going too far back. And their plan was not much of a plan, in Trevor's opinion, because it was just to land and see what they'd find, because there was no time to obtain the specifications for the prison or do some surveillance on it, because of course there's the execution order going out and they had to get there as fast as they could. And Ferris is looking at the nav computer and he notices that there's he's looking at the nav computer and he's keeping alert for any signs of Imperial patrol ships, because they do often surround the prison world, as Olian told him. And we learn that, and as the book says, every nerve inside him was screaming to land and find Ferris. And that's when that's when Trevor notices that there's a ship being chased, the freighter that Ferris and Clive are in, and they're being chased by the, it says Imperial Starfighters, but let's just call them TIE Fighters. They're being chased by TIE Fighters, and Solace says that it's not their problem. It will give them a bit of a distraction so they can go down. And then that's when she senses that Ferris is on the ship, and she informs Olian that they need to go and protects the freighter. So then the space battle occurs, and Solace makes a diving motion, and Trevor is just suddenly slammed back into his seat, and only then Solace says, "Did I warn you to hang on?" There's quite a lot of humour in this chapter, and again, we're reminded of Solace's piloting skills and how skilled she had been, even flying through tight spaces and close shaves. That was on Coruscant air traffic, and now this was combat flying fast in a dangerous situation. To Trevor, it might have even been thrilling if he didn't feel like he was going to die any second. Solace asks Trevor if he's able to operate the cannons, and Trevor says that he's pretty good, even though he's never done it before. And so the fighters haven't noticed that they're enemies yet. And Trevor's able to get a shot on one of them. And then Trevor quickly realises that it's a lot harder to shoot the starfighters if they're making evasive manoeuvres and shooting back. Eventually, Ferris chimes in over the communications and says, "Whoever you are, thank you." And Keats replies saying, "It's us, sweet cake, watching your back as usual." I don't know what it is about Keats, but he gives people the funniest names, and the sweetest as well. And eventually they take out the remaining fighters. And Ferris asks about a rendezvous point, and Solace looks through the possibilities and asks about going to Alba 16, and that it's not far from the Empire, and the Empire has no real presence there. And that's when Clive chimes in and says, and it's got a great cantina, and Olion just says, who was that? And Trevor is comforted when he hears Ferris laugh and says, don't ask. And as they're approaching, Clive has a small chat with Ferris, saying that he was always aware there was something odd about Ferris, but never guessed he would have been a Jedi. And Ferris says that he was never a Jedi, because he was still a Padawan when he left, and Clive says he never heard of a Jedi leaving the Order, and he would have felt a lot better if he knew he had a Jedi with him. Ferris says he didn't want to get his hopes up because he's just not as skilled as he used to be, he's not as powerful as he used to be, and he also didn't have a lightsaber. And he says that it was a nice surprise and that Ferris did alright. And that's when Ferris said, you didn't have to punch me. Authenticity, Master Ferris. That's the key to every escape. Eventually they land and Trevor charges toward Ferris. And then he stops, embarrassed. And Ferris sees Trevor's hands dangling, and he knows Trevor wants to show his emotions, but he doesn't want to expose them in front of everyone else. And he just says, the boy was such a curious mixture of emotion and toughness. And then it goes on to say, Ferris has once been a stiff person too, but not anymore. He slung one arm around Trevor's shoulders and gave him a quick, fierce hug. And he says to Trevor, you thought you lost me, didn't you? And Trevor says, you do have a way of cutting things close. Keith says to Ferris to do him a favour and not get arrested again. And then I'm just going to read off this line because it is quite this little moment because it is quite funny to me. Who's he? Solace asked, indicating Clive. The answer to your dreams, precious, Clive said, linking an arm through hers. Let me buy you a glog. In a flash, Solace slips out of his grasp, twists one of his arms behind his back, and has her lightsaber hilt nudged up against his chin. Did I mention Solace was a Jedi too? Ferris asked. And this really, that has me laughing for quite a bit before I could move on. And Solace releases Clive, and they go up to the cantina there. And Ferris catches everyone up on what happened while he was in prison. And then they tell him about what... And then they also tell Ferris about what happens to the place of Solace. It's going to be so glad to stop referring to it as the place of Solace, and then and also the character of Solace. And Olian says that they reactivated all their information networks, and that's how they were able to find where they were holding them. And Keith says that they're not ready for a resistance movement yet, but they can link up with other worlds. And Ferris sees it too. He sees that it's years away, but as resistance rises on multiple worlds, they can establish a network for communications and maybe even establish an army. And it all had to start somewhere. And Ferris says, we just have to begin, and Coruscant is the perfect place to start. The Senate has always been full of informers, people eager for a bribe. Just because the Empire has taken over doesn't mean it isn't still true. And Keats tells him that Malorum is on Naboo, so he doesn't have to worry about him for a bit. And that starts setting off alarm bells in Ferris's head, because... And he doesn't quite know why, but it's also because... He also has a general idea as to why. Because, of course, Obi-Wan said that he needs to be alert to any investigations into the death of Padme, and that her funeral had been held on Naboo on the city of Thieves. And he tries to dismiss the importance of Malorum's visit, and he knows that there could be any number of reasons he's gone to Naboo. But he also cannot forget that he also couldn't forget that Obi-Wan believed Malorum could threaten the future of the galaxy if Malorum was to find out what he was trying to investigate. The answers of his investigation, sorry. And Ferris gets a bit annoyed for a moment because Obi-Wan was in exile and he gave him a vague order to something that he didn't tell him what was, not telling him what was at risk. He would have preferred he would have preferred to have a much more transparent and clear-cut mission. But Ferris thinks he can't ignore this, and he thinks that he will have to go alone. But he has a feeling that everyone there wouldn't let him go alone, as they had all shared an unusual bond, and he doesn't quite know how it happened, and how even Clive was now having that bond. And Ferris says, "I have to go to Naboo," Ferris says. Gates put down the pitcher of grog he was about to pour. "Just when I was starting to relax," he moans. Again, I'd say this chapter has quite a good few funny bits in it. And Ferris says that he's not asking them to come, but he has to go. And they go to... And Ferris just feels the weight in the moment, with everyone being quiet and considering his words. And Clive says that this place has really gone downhill, and that he just says, "Let's go." So that's where we end off the chapter. First off, where is Toma's ship? Seriously, where is Toma's ship? You know, it last appeared in Dark Warning and was last mentioned in Underworld. Where is Toma's ship? But anyway, I think this was quite a good chapter. Like the last chapter, it had some good action scenes, but I think the main thing is what comes afterwards. And you know, you've got Trevor, who really just wants to... He was just so happy that Ferris is okay. And he really wants to embrace him. And you know he really wants to, but... You know, he's quite complex. He doesn't want to expose himself in this way. And I think that's quite interesting. So, yeah. It has a lot of good funny bits as well. I think the funniest was probably Clive with Solace. So yeah, but yeah, haven't really got a whole lot to say on this chapter. I haven't really. But I think it was a very good chapter. Again, I like Trevor's reactions to Ferris being okay. And I pretty much skimmed through the whole battle scene because, again, you know, I don't want to describe every single action going on in there. But especially because it goes on for about 4 or so pages, but there was a line where Ferris says, "You owe me a favour," and Trevor just shouts as he's from his little place where he's operating the blaster cannons. He just shouts, "You owe us more than a few. You owe us more than one." And again, you know that's just know that that's Trevor's way of expressing his love, I guess, for Ferris, because again, he's kind of adopted Ferris as his guardian. He even says in the book he's adopted Ferris as his guardian, and you really see their bond, and you really just see Trevor's connection for Ferris. So yeah, I think so far this has been a really good book so far. I'm over halfway through now, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it progresses. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 13 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. Now, I was actually meant to read this chapter yesterday, but I only got round to reading one chapter yesterday, which was of course chapter 12. But we've cut to Malorum on Naboo, and we talked about how wonderful and gracious and how wonderful and ornate everything was on Naboo. And Malorum just wants to blast the place to space dust, as it says. Everywhere he's going, he's met with smiles and bows, and whenever he asks questions, he's met with earnest desires to help him, thoughtful frowns, fingers clicking on data keys, careful reviewing of records, and he never gets an answer. And the functionaries would always say with a helpless shrug, "Alas and sadly," and it's infuriating Malorum. No one's defying him, and no one's refusing him, but they're not giving him what he wants, and he can't really punish them. Because, of course, they're doing all they can for him, in the sense of so it's infuriating Malorum. But they definitely, and also they just seem to cooperate fully, so even though they weren't helping him, he can't really punish them for cooperating fully. And he gets the feeling that they might be enjoying thwarting his plans thwarting what he's trying to do behind his back. And you can see why the Emperor put a battalion on the planet. And how they hadn't interfered with the governments there yet. But it was still a slight reminder as to the Empire's supremacy and who's in charge. And he thinks that it was a smart choice for them to take over one of the buildings right next to the hangar. That way they could monitor all ships coming in and going out, and blow up the hangar if there was any sign of resistance against Senate rules. But, of course, who would ever know that, as it says in the book? Malorum thinks the people of Theed would have learned something from the Trade Federation blockade, but to him they just didn't. And it's almost lost my bookmark. Then we learn that Naboo is pretty much completely reliant on for its industrial needs from other planets. And if Malorum was in charge, he would have had them go straight out and attack the surrounding worlds that were rich for in minerals and industry. And as Malorum walks by the Imperial garrison, he hopes it will give him some fresh energy, because he's being driven insane by this place. And we learn that he visited the place of where Padme's body was prepared for the burial, and he received no new information except a crash course he needs in the funeral rites of Naboo. And but from that, it did give him some useful information, because he learned that it's usually the grandmothers who are designated to dress the body and prepare it for what they refer to as the last journey. And Malorum knows that Padme's death is recorded, but there's just no hint as to how she died. As far as he knows, because again, the galaxy believes it was from the Jedi. And we also learn that the customs of the Naboo, they completely prevent any questions into who the father of her child was. And we also learned that there was no doctor's report. And that's when Malorum realises, oh, of course the records aren't going to show him what he wants. He must go to Padme's grandmother's to learn. And that's when we learn that Naboo doesn't have a world's directory system. And that citizens soon have to register with the government. But he knew Palpatine would change that as soon as he got round to Naboo. But privacy, for now, is prized on Naboo. And the situation's worse because everyone seems to know everybody and where they live. So if you ask where someone lives, you're pretty much saying, I don't know them very well. It's not an insurmountable problem, but it is a problem for Malorum. So he goes to the Naboo Essentials provider, and as he walks in, he sees a hollow map of the generator room, and he asks to see the manager, and the clerk there just tells him that if he could come back tomorrow because they're about to close, and Malorum just has had enough of this, and he snaps that I'm a personal representative of Emperor Palpatine, get him for me now. And he just can't wait to get the information out of the manager. And so the clerk goes to the office and Malorum pretty much pushes him aside and goes in. And he's just lost it at this point. We learn that he doesn't like raising his voice, which is quite funny because he's done that quite a bit here in earlier in the book. We do learn he doesn't like raising his voice without losing his temper to not be as intimidating, but he asks where the address is for the grandmothers of Padme Amidala are, and he then asks, and the clerk and the manager says that Padme, he says, Senator Amidala, alas and sadly, is deceased. And Malorum just, again, he's had enough. He just says he knows that, the desk knows that. What are the names of her grandmothers? And he says, I know you know them, so don't waste my time with denials. And the manager gives up the name of Winabert Nabare and Waihu Thule. And Malorum demands their addresses, and we learn that Winabert Nabare, alas and sadly, died before the Battle of Naboo. Then Malorum roars for the other one. And again, he tells he tells him that the manager says he doesn't have that. Well, I don't have that information per se. You see, this is the office of the Essentials provider. And Malorum just has had enough of this. And he draw of how people wish to help him. They have nothing for him. They repeat what their title of industry is. And he has had enough. He pulls his blaster out on him and asks him, now calming his voice, if he sees this, and then says he will blast everyone in the building if he doesn't give him the address. And that's when the manager realises, oh, Malorum will very much do that, so he tells him that Ryuthul now lives in the Lake District of Naboo in the family villa called Valley Kino in Translucent's Cove. And Malorum just goes, that isn't much of an address. And the manager says that that's all the direction he can give him. That's the way they do things on Naboo. And it's the only direction he can give him. And Malorum really wants to blast the manager to smithereens. But he storms out, and he knows he'll have to do his own investigating, even though it would be tedious. He knows he can't trust anyone else, and he'll need his own he'll need his own local transport. And the last line of the book, all to see an old woman who might hold the key to something he still didn't understand. You really... I'm going to... So, now to the review. You really just see Malorum's frustration. It's funny in a way, but also... You really can just tell Malorum's had enough of this. He's being driven insane by this place. And, you know, it's all his usual tricks for domination don't really work here, because he gets the feeling they're trying to do everything they can for him, but everything they're trying to do isn't helping him. So he can't go around threatening or killing them, can he? Because that's not how it works. So he's being driven insane and he can't do anything about it, and it's quite funny. And once Malorum loses his temper, you know, it really is a moment. But yeah, it's quite funny to see him start just losing it here. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see just what information Thule will give Malorum. Because I know he does go and interrogate her and kill her at some point in the book. So it's going to be... So yeah, it will be interesting to see what information Thule gives up. And it really... Again, not really a whole lot to talk about, aside from Malorum just being driven insane by this place. You really just see how frustrated he is, and it's just hilarious. It's hilarious in a way. But yeah. Is there anything else to talk about with the chapter? We get a bit of insight into kind of like how the Naboo and their in what the customs of the Naboo are, and we learn a little bit about their culture and how things work on Naboo. So I guess that's quite interesting. Nothing significant, you know. It's lots of small trinkets about how everything works rather than anything big, but it is something. So yeah. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to also see how Ferrosolum finds Malorum on Naboo, and how they even get into the generator room in the first place. Because I know that's where the duel takes place. It's in the same place where Maul fought Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. So I'm going to be interested to see just where that duel, how that duel gets there. I'm fairly sure Malorum even dies in the same place Qui-Gon died. But he falls down the reactor shaft like Maul, so it's going to be quite interesting to see just how they get into that area in the first place. But yeah. I think that's probably going to do it for this review. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 14 of The Last of the Jedi Death on Naboo. So, Ferrus and Solus, Ferrus, Trevor and the others are all now, well I assume Trevor is there, they're all now on Naboo in Theed. And Clive knows his way about Theed, and they've landed on the at an entry platform on the outskirts of Theed. And Clive is showing them around, taking them through the streets, and Ferrus is telling him, I hope this isn't just a tour of cantinas. And Clive tells him that he can throw those into. But he says that they're going to meet with Captain Typho. And Keats says, oh, I know Typho. I interviewed him. He interviewed him during the Clone Wars, or before that, or whatever. What was it? Hold on. Yeah, okay, it says he interviewed him a couple of times, and that's Amidala trusted him. It's turning to Amidala. Typho is in an office, and they meet each other, and he remembers Keats and greets Clive warmly, and Clive says that he wasn't crazy about the accommodations in the prison, and they hear about an inquisitor named Malorum, and Typho explains that they know he's here, and they've been tracking his movements, and that he's began at the Imperial Battalion offices, and they know they're setting up a spy network on Naboo. And they're trying to keep them under surveillance, even as they do spy on them. And they've taken over the government building next to the hangar, and that even though the laws of Naboo forbid it, they suspect that they're secretly storing and stocking weapons and explosives there. And Curran even says, that's against the laws of the Senate as well. So you think they're planning to take over the government? And Typho says, it's possible. And they have assault ships in orbit, and they've done it with equally uncooperative worlds in the past, and under the guise of keeping the order. And Ferris is well aware of it, that because of Belasa. And Typho says that he's heard about Belasa, and that's why they've been keeping a watchful eye on Malorum, but he doesn't seem to be here in any official capacity, as while he has checked in with the Imperial Regiment, he doesn't seem to be here on official business. And that has been keeping a low profile. And Keats asks what he's been up to, and Typho explains that they've been receiving reports from government officials that he's investigating the funeral of Amidala. Typho admits that he's also investigated Amidala's death because he just can't believe the Jedi killed her, because they were her friends and she believed in them absolutely, and never believed the rumours that they were abusing their power. And Ferris just doesn't see how Malorum is interested. He doesn't know why Malorum's interested, but he knows he must be stopped. And Typho says he'll do what he can to help them. And Ferris asks where he is now, and Typho explains that he's no longer in a feed, and he's gone off to meet with Ryut Thul, who lives in seclusion. And he's tried to contact her, but she hasn't answered any of their signals, and Ferris says that they'll have to direct us there. That Typho will have to direct them there. But he needs to first speak with Queen Apinala. A-P-A-I-L-A-A-P-A-I-L-A-N-A. Apilana? I kept reading it as Apilana. But eventually they all come in. Ferris asks that if he can request that on his signal that Apinala shuts down all comms signals, internal and external. And Apinala goes, oh, that's a bit of a big request. And Ferris explains that the Jedi are that he and Solas are among the last Jedi left, and that she was once a friend of the Republic, and that Malorum has to be stopped because he's not only a danger to Naboo, he's also a danger to the peaceful future of the galaxy. And the Queen says that she's reluctant, but she knows he's right, and she never believed the official reports of Padme's death, and had Typho look into it. Even though there's nothing really to be found. And she says that she still thinks of the Jedi as friends, and Padme had faith in them even towards the final days of her life, and so she'll help the Jedi no matter if there's 1 or 1,000, and that she'll still think of them as friends. And she says that she'll do the comm signals on 2 conditions: that it is only to be done in the most dire necessity, which Ferris reassures that will be the case, and that she'll only do it for an hour only, for 1 hour, because they can fake an outage for a time, but they can't do it for an extensive period, otherwise the Imperial presence will become suspicious. Ferris says thank you, and the Queen says thank you for your service. And Ferris says to her, thank you for not giving up. No, she says, thank you for your service, the Queen replies. Now it is her turn to incline her head in a gesture of respect to Ferris and the others. Thank you for not giving up. And that's how the chapter ends. So, I wasn't expecting Captain Typho to have any sort of role in The Last of the Jedi in general. Which, looking back now, is a bit of a surprise, given... Now, to be fair, I didn't know he was part of the Naboo kind of army or whatever it was. So I don't know a lot about Typho, but I know he's a character that exists. I mean, this is the first time I'm even hearing of his first name, so which is Gregor. But yeah, I wasn't expecting Typho to have any involvement at all, but he did. So that was quite a pleasant surprise. I also didn't expect Queen Apinala to have a role either, but again, seems kind of obvious, especially since on her old databank entry on StarWars.com, Malorum is mentioned in her databank entry, and how she is frustrated with her openness for being how open she is against the Empire. So, which really, that's very in character for Malorum. He doesn't like being resisted. So, yeah, I'm going to be curious as to see why they want to take down the comms. I'm going to be curious to see why Ferris wants to do that. I assume it's probably to stop Malorum from reporting anything to Vader or Palpatine, but then again, he's doing this for himself, so what would the point even be, you know? Would it be to... I don't know. I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see just how this progresses. So, yeah. I think that should really wrap it up for this, because there isn't a whole lot to talk about. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read Chapter 15 of The Last of the Jedi, The Death on Naboo. So, we're here with Ryu Thule, who is Padmé's maternal grandmother. And she's walking back up from the lake outside of her home, and she very quickly runs out of breath. And it's not because she's feeling winded, it's because of old age, and she just has to get used to it, because she's still having to adjust. And she thinks if she walks slowly and not try to run up like she used to as a kid, everything will be fine. And she starts thinking back, and she makes her way up about the trips she would take with her family down to the lake. And once she oh, gone a bit too far back. And again, she woke up early to watch the sunrise, and she went down to the lake, and we learn that she had been good friends with Winema Nabele, who is, of course, Padmé's paternal grandmother. I think that's what it is, paternal. And they had plotted to marry off their children, and they had been very surprised when they'd actually fallen in love. And her beloved grandchild wanted up being Padmé. And it says in the book, in some ways, Padmé felt closer to her now that she was gone. And we learn that Padmé thought that Ryu, or whatever it is, Padmé had been on her way to somewhere else from an early age, and that she had been the most loving granddaughter possible. But her visits had always been short respites from a busy life. And but she never suggested that that was the case, whether it's by word or look, and her whole heart had been in those visits, and why you felt it just the same, and because she was closer to Padme than any of her granddaughters, and why you knew she had secrets, and she knew before Padme that Padme was in love, and that love was entwined with heartbreak, and that Padme's death had broken her own heart, and she did the custom of being the overseer of her funeral, and she kissed her Padme's cheek, and she tucked small white blossoms into her clothing and hair, and she had wept on a cold floor, and the grief was still inside her, as it says, a stone in her belly, but she found peace at this little home, and she knows Padme had loved this place, and that Padme was all around her, and that she was part of the galaxy now. And now she stands at the window looking at the lake, and she feels her heart flutter, and she wonders why she woke up with such a sense of foreboding, and why she had woken up feeling so especially, and why Padme felt so especially close to her today. She wonders why she was so restless, and what was this feeling, and she had been here for 6 months mourning, and she decides that it was time for her to return to her life in Theed, and that she wasn't too old yet to find a renewed sense of purpose. And she knows Padme would want that. And she wonders if that's maybe the source of her anxiety, and as she knows it was time to let go of her grief, but she's reluctant to. And she has to remind herself that leaving this place wouldn't leave behind all her wonderful memories of Padme. And she looks at the comlink station, and it's the lights blinking, telling her that there's multiple unread messages. And she thinks she'll get to them later in the day, as she usually does, and she smiles at them because she knows it's all the warm voices of friends and family, which we of course know it's all the warning things. But it's to her, she thinks it's all of her friends and family all wanting to bring her news or checking on her, and she decided it was time to pick them up again, and that she would leave the home tomorrow, and that it was time to return to Theed. That's when she hears footsteps in the reception hall below, and she winds up getting filled with fear. And she even says, and as she goes down the stairs, she realises this is the sense, an uneasy feeling she was feeling all day, and she sees Malorum down there, and she immediately gets scared, and she just starts thinking, Padme, I'm afraid. And she told herself that she was being ridiculous, and that she was right, she'd been got here for far too long. And she outstretched her hand, ready to greet the stranger, because on Naboo, every stranger is a potential friend. Malorum throws back his hood, and Ryu knows why she felt what she felt, and that today was the day she was going to die, and that's how we end this chapter off. This is a very sad and sweet chapter, because you really do feel Ryu's pain, you really do, and you really do feel sorry for her. It's ever so sweet. And you really just want to give her a nice big hug, a nice big cuddle, tell her everything's okay. I think this is a very sweet chapter in that sense. Again, really the only thing to talk about is Ryu Thul's character, but it's a very sweet chapter. It's very sweet. And I know she doesn't survive, but you really just see your love for Padme, and you really don't want her to die. And I think that's, for only knowing the character for a couple pages, Jude Watson did a very good job at establishing this character in a very small amount of time. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read Chapter 16 of The Last of the Jedi Death on Naboo. So, Ryufall has... Oh no, I've gone back a bit too far here. So, Ryufall greets Malorum with respect and even offers him tea, and Malorum rejects it, and he thinks, and it says Malorum hasn't received the title of Inquisitor for nothing, and he knew when even the most skillful being was holding him back, and he starts trying to get Ryu to talk, and he tells her that he knows about the Naboo rituals and that she was in charge of her granddaughter's funeral, and Ryu says that no one is in charge of their funeral rites, and that she was there to support her grieving family, and that Naboo is not a hierarchy like his system, and that they have a queen but they elect her as well as her advisors. And Malorum says, I don't need a lesson on Naboo philosophy. I don't need a lesson on Naboo political philosophy. And Malorum can see that she thinks him a pompous fool, and he thinks that she will learn. And Ryu goes on to explain that the grandmother makes sure that everything runs smoothly, and it can get quite complicated, especially in a state funeral. And Malorum asks what Padme died of, and she says that she doesn't know. And Malorum continues to ask that if there were any marks on her body, and he sees her flinch, and then he asks, and she shakes her head, and then he asks who brought her to feed, and she says, I don't know, I was summoned after she'd arrived. She couldn't have come on her own. She was dead when she got here. For me, that's quite of a humorous line, even though it's not meant to be a funny scene. Then we see Ryu, and again we see it with Ryu's perspective, and her cheeks just suddenly get flushed with anger because she doesn't like how Malorum is talking about her beloved granddaughter in such a casual way, yet he was choosing his words with such great care so that he could get anything out of this woman so he could anger Ryu to get her to talk. And she says, and then Ryu says that whoever brought her there did so with great care and gentleness, and and that was all that they worried about at the time. And Malorum says that she was pregnant, and he asks Ryu if her family knew who the father was. And she says that it's a private matter, and Malorum asks if she would like to spend some time in a prison, Imperial prison, and Ryufall just says no, but if he thinks threatening her will get her to talk, then he is mistaken. And he looks at her. She looks at him with her dark grey eyes dusted with a bit of gold. Malorum finds them mesmerising for a moment, but as he looks in, he can see all the contempt she feels, and sees what she was feeling: great love, strength, and courage. And he puts those irrelevancies aside, and he started to look beneath and see that there was something she suspected, and only she suspected. And she continues to say that Padme didn't share the father's name, and that they didn't ask because that's how things are done on Naboo. Things like that are private matters. And she continues to say a little bit more, and how she had been the light of their lives, and she doesn't really appreciate him. And she says to him that he has no right to come here and ask a question and ask her questions about Padme. And Malorum just says, I too have a right. The Emperor has given me that right. I am his personal representative. And the words are just becoming all too familiar to Malorum because of how much he went around Theed. And then he asks if she knew Anakin Skywalker, and she says that he was a friend of Padme, and Malorum asks, did she ever suspect that he was the father of the child? And something flashes in her eyes, and Malorum knows she knew something, but not knew, suspected. And then we learn that Malorum has a sense of intuition that he thinks of as his river, and that it's always been there even when he was younger, and he just believed he was smarter than anyone else, but now he knew it wasn't intelligence, but just another sense bigger than he. And he was frustrated because he couldn't control it fully, but he knows it's here now, and he uses it to focus on Thule. And that's when I assume this is the ability drain knowledge, but you never know. And he says, and he immediately starts to realise what she suspects, which is the child is alive, and he's incredibly happy about that. And we learn that she had never spoken of the granddaughter, but she says she had spoken of her granddaughter, but never of the child she carried. That she did not was in itself a signal. The child is alive, he said, and you could see on her face that she believed it. And he starts advancing upon her, and Ryu just starts kind of shrinking before him, and he's bombarding her with questions, and he just says, have you ever seen the child? Has anyone contacted you about the child? Has anyone visited the child? Did Padme know the child was living before she died? Did she give the child to someone? Is someone hiding the child? Where is the child? And the questions keep coming, but Ryu kind of holds up her hands as if to ward them off. But she knows a little, and she gives a look of defiance. Malorum knows that she would tell him nothing, and what she did know wasn't really enough. Would probably not help her, help him, and so he kills her. Unfortunately, you really get to kind of see Malorum's strength in interrogation here, and it's quite interesting, I'd say, because Malorum this chapter kind of just shows how bad, yet also how good Malorum can be when it comes to interrogation. You know, he's always having some, in every kind of situation we've seen in him when trying to interrogate, he's always come across some sort of resistance. You know, he's had it with Amy Anson, he had it with Ferrosolan, he's had it with the manager, he's now had it with Ryu Thule. But in this scene, you see how effective he is, thanks to his intuition and his instinct. And he really actually gets quite intimidating. And I'm not sure if I've actually felt that from Malorum yet. And the way he just starts bombarding Thule with questions, the way he just starts immediately asking the questions, one question after another, after another, after another. And they are on separate lines as well, and with quotation marks around each question, so they can get a bit... So, you need to kind of think it in the way of Malorum, otherwise it can get a bit confusing if you're trying to alternate between Malorum and Ryu, which it's not. It's not alternating between Malorum and Ryu. But I also like how Ryu was holding her ground against Malorum, and how you really just see her loyalty to not only her family but Padme, and how even in this state of grief she's trying her best to protect them. And yeah, it's quite a special thing. But yeah, again, it's good. I had a little peek at the next chapter. Seems like Ferris Solon doesn't get there in time, unfortunately. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see just what Malorum's next move is intended to be. So yeah, or maybe Ferris Solon and Malorum come face to face with each other here, and Malorum escapes. It's going to be interesting to see how this progresses. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read Chapter 17 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. So this was actually quite a good high-paced action chapter, which, if anything, this book has lacked action. I really can't win with The Last of the Jedi, can I? Dark warning, too much action. Death on Naboo, not enough action. And I think there's been a fairly good balance of action and no action in Death on Naboo. I think there's been a very good balance between it. Unlike Dark Warning, where it's like ba 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 ba. Every chapter had to have some sort of action almost. But let me see if I can get to the page. Oh, there it begins. So Ferris and the gang, I'm just going to say Ferris and the gang, get to Navarrakino, which is where Ryu was, and Solace and Ferris immediately start leaping up, and they run in and they go into the villa, and there's Ryu on the floor, and she's relieved to see a Jedi, and Ferris can tell that, okay, her family don't blame, the Amidala family don't blame the Jedi for Padme's death. And she says that he suspects Malorum, and that's when Ryu says, he can't tell anyone what he knows. You must protect. Protect what? For Padme. For Padme. And she passes away. And Solace asks Ferris what is going on, and he explains that he doesn't even know why he's on this mission, but that Obi-Wan told him that he has to stop Malorum, because Ryu knows something, and now Malorum knows it, and that what he knows is that there's a secret that can threaten the galaxy if it gets out, which is of course the Luke and Leia. And Solace immediately doesn't question, she just goes, Kenobi, then let's do it. So they come out, and the gang are finally catching up. They're at the top step of the villa now, and Ferris says it's too late, Malorum's gone, but they know he's around here, otherwise they would have seen his ship leaving as they came. So Olian says he must have hidden his craft, and Clive says that this flaming coastline is full of coves, but they should send a signal. And so they did that, so they do that, and Ferris says to split into twos, and that Malorum is a bit of a handful, and he asks for Trevor to stay behind. And Trevor just goes, no. But what are you expecting from Trevor? Come on, it's Trevor. And Ferris just doesn't bother to argue, so he just takes off alone, and he knows Trevor will follow him. So he eventually leaps down to the bay, and he starts using the Force. He taps into the living Force, and he's able to sense that the living Force is near, and the dark side is pulsating, and he does some leapfrogging over some over some rocks, and then he sees Malorum there, and Malorum takes off, and Ferrus leaps into the air, and Malorum suddenly turns his gondola speeder. He suddenly turns it around towards Ferrus. Ferrus then reacts as a Jedi does and doesn't retreat. And he stops his momentum mid-air, and he waits the microsecond it takes for Malorum to reach him. Then he somersaults over the craft and uses the updraft to power himself out of harm's way, then drop onto the gondola. Well, it says, well, not dropped exactly, but in the neat way he could have accomplished even as an apprentice. Rather, he fell awkwardly, sprawling on the hull. And as he's on the hull, Malorum yanks the speeder towards the water. And Ferrus, he's got his legs splashing in there, and it feels like, as it says, permacrete. And you have this really funny sequence where you have Ferrus going, ow! Ferrus grunted through his teeth as the gondola bumped along, and he hung on for his life. Ow, ow, ow! I found that funny. Eventually Ferrus does get on top of the gondola, and he's able to kind of get his ground, and he kicks Malorum in the chest. Malorum pretty much messes up with the controls, and it starts spinning out of control, and Ferrus stands on the stern with his lightsaber, and Malorum starts using his blaster to open fire on him. And Ferrus is deflecting them, and he knows Malorum can't aim under these conditions. You know, they're twirling while the speed is at high speed. Is that pretty much at full speed? It's very difficult to aim in these conditions, but Malorum's doing a good job of aiming. And in the distance, Solus and Olian are coming in their own gondola, while Curian and Keats are also coming in their own gondola, and Ferrus wonders where Trevor and Clive is, and that's when Malorum pulls back the fabric on his robe, which confuses me because in the art for the book, you know, Malorum's robe doesn't have sleeves, so that's a bit confusing, but you know, but the thing is though, in the Asian market cover for Death on Naboo, Malorum looks nothing like the Japanese or the main cover, so yeah, so you know, could be worse. But Malorum pulls back a sleeve and opens fire a wrist rocket. So Malorum does have wrist rockets, and it fires towards Curran and Keats, and Solus tries to warn them, and she starts turning her gondola violently, and Curran and Keats, but it's too late, and Curran and Keats leap off the gondola into the water. And that is when Clive and Trevor, in their own boats, are coming towards them, and it's and Ferrus is just thinking, of course, he thought the two thieves had stolen a boat. And we learn that Malorum's gondola is still spinning out crazily, but Clive and Trevor are heading straight towards them, and no doubt to try and distract Malorum, and Ferris thought it's a good plan, but he only hopes he doesn't fall off before they reach him. And that's when Imperial IBV-1 patrol craft pull up. And we learn that, and Malorum must have called them in before Queen Apiyama had turned off the communications. And suddenly the missiles start dropping around them. Of course they're not trying to kill Malorum, but yeah, and other patrol craft peel off to attack the other gondolas and Clive and Trevor's boat. And Ferris sees one patroller dipping toward him, and so Ferris leaps at Malorum, who pretty much fires a blaster straight into Ferris's face, yet Ferris somehow deflects it. But before it can hit Malorum, he dives up onto a line, which he dives much higher than Ferris would have expected Malorum to be capable of. And he doesn't even bother hooking himself up to it, he's just holding on. Ferris leaps up onto the line on the tail end of it, and he sees that there are missiles heading for Clive and Trevor's boat, and they leap off at the very last possible second. And he also sees there's other patrol craft going for Keats and Curran, and he looks up, and there's Malorum with what's described as a fervid and triumphant face, and there's a repeating gun being pointed down to Ferris. Ferris lets go of the cable and drops down into what's described as... He let go of the cable and dropped into the cold blue lake. So, again, not really a whole lot to talk about, but it's going to be very interesting to see how Ferris finds Malorum again. And I think this was a really good kind of battle scene as well. And it's interesting to see how Malorum even was able to hold his own against Ferris for as long as he did with only his blaster. So I'm going to be very interested to see just what goes on, just how this will progress. I find it hilarious that Clive and Trevor were the ones to steal a boat, because of course they were. They're the thieves. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. It is a bit of a shame that Ryuthul is dead now. I know she would die, but it is a bit of a shame because you really did feel for her. You really did. But yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see just how Ferris and the others, and the gang, I'm just going to say Ferris and the gang, find Malorum again. I assume they're going to think, right, he's going to Theed, he's probably going to try and get off Naboo. We need to get to the hangar. Because I know they do start fighting in the same place where Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon fought Maul, which is again in the hangar. So I assume that's roughly where it will be. But yeah, this was quite a fun chapter to read. It's quite a stressful one as well. Looking forward to see just where this goes, especially because, you know, we've got chapter 18, 19, 20 and 21, so we haven't got a lot of chapters left to go, but it's going to be very interesting to see just how this progresses, and also how they get back to Theed in time to stop Malorum, and also how they're going to defend themselves from the IPV-1s, or the IPFA ones. So yeah, again, not really a whole lot to talk about with this chapter, but yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read chapter 18 of The Last of the Jedi Death on Naboo. So Ferris has again leaped into the water and he's swimming towards Trevor. And he doesn't know if Trevor can even swim, which of course we know Trevor can't. and he just can't see anything in the water, even though it's meant to be crystal clear. All he can see is blue, and he's starting to get the feeling of disorientation, and he knows he has to get to these, but he doesn't want to abandon his friends. And that's when he sees a Gungan submarine come, and it picks him up, and Solace and the gang are in there alongside Trevor. And he's heard of Gungans, and it says, from all he'd heard, they were friendly beings, although they could wage a pretty nasty battle if they had to. Just his type. And, their pilot, I think it's Unabana, I think that's the name of the pilot, says that he can take them pretty much anywhere they want. Ferris says that, but also before that, Ferris says that he has no doubt Malorum's on his way to the Imperial headquarters at Feeds, and that's surely where he's left his private ship. Well, it just says transport. And he says that he'll need Unabana's help. It is Unabana. And he says, and Unabana says he can take them anywhere he wants, and Ferris goes, no. And Ferris goes, no, all of you, as in all the Gungans. And he requests, and as they come to the, and he says, and they go, and he calls up Apilana, which is the only channel left open at the moment, and says he wants to call in a small favour. Another small favour. And the Queen just goes, you ask for much, Jedi Olin? And Ferris just goes, you have no idea. And they go over to the Gungan city. And we learn that Trevor had never heard of the Gungans. And he felt safe in their cities and would like to just live here and forget everything that was happening above. But then there was the line that really made me laugh, and it was, but of course, he was with Ferris 1, the owner of a one-track Jedi mind. And that made me laugh for quite a bit after I read that. But Ferris has immediately requested a meeting with their leader, Boss Nass, and they get Queen Apilana there on hologram, and they introduce themselves, and Ferris and Solace introduce themselves as Jedi, and as the call starts, there was a first line that I found very funny as well. Trevor stood back with Clive, Keats, Cohen and Olian as Solace and Ferris thanked Boss Nass and the Queen, and Boss Nass thanked the Jedi, and the Queen thanks Boss Nass, and Boss Nass thanked the Queen for what seemed like a very long time, and finally everyone was silent. We also know that we're also told that the Queen and the Naboo and the Gungans felt like they owed a great debt to the Jedi because of the Trade Federation blockade in episode 1. But Apinado asks what Ferris wants, and Ferris asks for them to attack the Imperial headquarters in Theed. And Boss Nass is absolutely astounded and says that that would be a bad strategy. And Apilana, who is a bit less intense than Boss Nass, agrees with Boss, saying that they would be surely met with the retribution. Trevor just goes, and that many civilians would perish, and that's retribution would be inflicted on both the Naboo and the Gungans. And Trevor just goes, that's for sure. And Ferris shoots Trevor a look which needs no translation, as it very clearly is, don't speak. And Ferris says that he understands the magnitude of what he asks, but Malorum knows of a secret that could impact the entire galaxy and could destroy any hope of someday living in peace and true justice. And says that he wouldn't ask this if he didn't think there was a way that no harm could come to them. And he says, your information network has reported that the Empire is legally stockpiling destructive weapons in the Thieves' Hangar in defiance of Senate regulations. If we blow up the hangar, if we blow up the weapons cache, it would seem like a disaster the Empire had brought on itself. The officials back on Coruscant would wish to hush up the explosion so that the Senate wouldn't hear about it. The Emperor may despise the Senate, but he still needs it to cloak his crimes. And Apinala goes, your plan depends on winning the battle. And so says that the combined power of the Naboo and Gungans would be more than a match for the Empire. They've gone up against far worse, and Ferris says that he has faith in both the Gungans and the Naboo. And Boss Nass eventually says, what a belly good trick, and agrees to help them. And Apinala isn't as quick, but she says that it might remove the Empire from Naboo for some time if it works. And Ferris asks if they'll commit their forces and that they can draw up the plans here and coordinate when they reach feed. And Boss Nass says, faster is the goals underwater. We can bring the army that our way. Boss Nass is very difficult to understand in text rather than in listening. But then Queen Apilana says, we'll be ready, and that's where we end off the chapter. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about, this is just a lot of plotting, but it's going to be interesting, it's going to be quite interesting to see just how this battle turns out, especially because I am aware that, spoilers, that Ferris does turn to the dark side. I am aware of that. I am aware he becomes an agent for Palpatine. So it will be very interesting, very, very interesting indeed, to see just what happens. So, yeah. And I've been waiting for this for so long, for so long, in these books, because the thing is, Malorum is known for being the first Grand Inquisitor of the Empire. But we never knew. He's never actually described as Grand Inquisitor. Briefly in the first book, Malorum is described as the Emperor's head Inquisitor, but head is not capitalised. But finally, in this book, finally, I've been waiting for this, Ferris says, the future of the galaxy depends on it, Ferris says. That I can promise you. The head of the Imperial Inquisitors, Malorum, has found out an important secret. And so finally, here he is being described technically as a Grand Inquisitor, because Grand Inquisitor holds the title of leader of the Inquisitorius and head of the Inquisitors. So I can finally put that to rest in my head now. I can finally go, because it's been really bothering me, especially because this is almost at the end of the fourth book and the last book Malorum ever appears in. So he gets mentioned a few times, but this is the last book he appears in, and it's almost at the end he's finally confirmed as Grand Inquisitor. So I can finally relax, because that's something that's been really on my mind. Is he in Grand Inquisitor? Is he not? Will I have to read through all the other books to find out if he's Grand Inquisitor? Which, I am going to be reading through them because of Hydra. Grand Inquisitor Hydra, but, it's still a bit... it's just relieving now. Again, Head Inquisitor wasn't necessarily capitalised, but... yeah. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how this battle plays out, how successful the battle is as well. Trevor's a delight as always. Like, even in his thoughts, you know, he's hilarious, you know, with it being. But here he was with Ferry One, a one-track mind Jedi. So yeah, Trevor is hilarious. These books definitely have a very good balance between seriousness and humour, and the humour never feels like it's invading serious moments. It always feels like it somehow slots in perfectly, and it just works so well. And you know, with the intense sadness at the start of the book with Trevor, and also the intense sadness towards the end of Underworld. It's so wonderful to see Trevor back to his usual self, because you really just felt for him, and it's just so nice to see him be his old self again. So, I don't think he's still quite fully his old self yet. I think he is still it, because of course they are still within having to constantly move because of Malorum, but it's going to be, but yeah, you know, it's wonderful to see Trevor warming back up again. So yeah, again with Trevor and Ferris, you really just want to give them big hugs. You really do. It's interesting that Siri, I'm fairly sure Siri Tachi, whichever it's meant to be, which is Ferris Nolan's master, hasn't actually been mentioned yet, I don't think. So that's actually quite interesting, because she's been mentioned in some way or another in all the previous books. She was definitely mentioned the most in Underworld, but she hasn't, I don't think she's been mentioned at all in this book yet. So it's going to be very interesting to see if she gets any mentions, especially because we've only got 3 more chapters to go, you know, chapter 19, chapter 20, chapter 21, and then we're done. So it's going to be very interesting to see just if she gets mentioned in some way or another. But yeah, and you know, we've only got 15 or so more pages. How many pages? Yeah, 15 pages left until the book's finished. So you know, that's about what, 5 pages a chapter or so. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Siri gets a mention, because it definitely feels a bit too late for that now. But maybe, you know, maybe Ferris still needs a moment of motivation. He'll think back to Siri. I think so far, this has been the best Lost of the Jedi book out of the first 4 so far. I think I can quite safely say that. I think Underworld and Dark Warning, you know, they felt quite samey. In some way, because they had a very kind of similar thing going for them. And even though Underworld I do think it's better than Dark Warning, you know, there are similarities between the two of them. And Dark Warning very much just feels like it was setting up a lot for the plot, and there wasn't a whole lot of story going on, if that makes sense. Again, I like Dark Warning, I want to make it clear. I don't dislike Dark Warning, I like all the books so far, but some books are better than others. But I think Death on Naboo is so far the best one out of the first 4, and Desperate Mission is by far the second best, you know, if from best to worst, but worst doesn't necessarily mean bad. Death on Naboo, Desperate Mission, Underworld, Dark Warning. And again, Dark Warning's not bad. I want to make it clear, in this list, worst is not bad, it's still good, but you know, it's on like the lower end of good, if that makes sense. Well, say lower end, maybe average good, and then you've got the others which are all a bit higher, but anyway, the more I talk about Underworld, the more it seems like I don't like it when I do. And you know, it has one of my favourite lines from these books so far as well, Dark Warning. The last time you flew through the standing stones, you almost crashed, and that was in a fighter. You're in a starship. Is he lying? Tome never lies. Oh, good. Yeah. If you want a bit more context to that, you can go through my Dark Warning reviews. So, yeah, I know that's within the first 8 chapters. I think it's like chapter 6 or 7. And that line's from, so yeah, you can go check out my Dark Warning reviews if you want to learn where that line came from. Anyway, I think that should really wrap it up for this chapter. I'm surprised I found so much to talk about with it, actually. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Oh, I wasn't expecting the Gungans. Nobody expects the Gungans. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 19 of The Last of the Jedi Death on Naboo. So this chapter ended quite abruptly. But Ferris, Solus and Olian are all aboard Gungan military launching ships. Well, Gungan military launching ship, not plural. And we learn that since the Trade Federation battle, the Gungans had designed troop transports that were long and narrow and go underwater, and are blue and green for camouflage. We learn that Ferris didn't bother arguing with Trevor to stay behind because he knew it would be a waste of breath, and so we learn what the plan is. Solus, Ferris and Orion are going to leave first and attack the Imperial headquarters. They're immediately to head there and break in. Ferris will break off to find Malorum, and Solus and Orion will try to stop any attempts of officers escaping, because usually the higher up the officer, the more there was a way for the officer to break off from. Usually there was another way for the officer to escape from the battalion. And we learn that Clive had asked not to get involved because war makes him nervous, and that he's a solo act, and Solus gave a snort of disapproval. But they go there, and we learn that, and the Naboo are there as well. And they press the attack onto the headquarters, and Solus, Ferris and Orion go over to the side and use their liquid cables to get up through the windows. And Solus pauses and hears the sounds of the battle, and hears it escalating, and says to Ferris that may the Force be with him. And Ferris nods and takes off through the window and starts running down the halls. And he's slicing down any troopers who get in his way, and there's officers running to scramble unload starter onto computers, and there's no doubt in Ferris's mind that it's some sort of Imperial protocol for if there was a surprise attack. And others are running to the Thieves' hangar, that's where he knows Malorum will be. And he eventually gets there, and amid all the ships in there, Malorum sees him, and he sees the flicker of a red cape, and Malorum's running away. And here it was. It says Malorum had seen him and was running away. I think actually, is it a little bit further down? Is it a bit further up? Yeah. And that was where Malorum would be headed. He wouldn't stand and fight, he would cut and run. And so he chases him down a long hallway that connects to another grand building, and it opens up into the feed power generator. And that's where Ferris goes, oh, this is where everyone fought Darth Maul, and this is where Qui-Gon died. And we learn that every Padawan in the temple has heard of the fight between the three of them. And the last few lines of the book of this chapter is,
But now it was different. He wasn't fighting a Sith, he was fighting an Imperial Inquisitor. Skilled with powerful weapons, yes, but not a Sith. Then Malorum turned, baring his teeth in a smile, and showed Ferrus his lightsaber. And that's where the chapter ends off. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about, but it had quite an abrupt end. But it's going to be interesting to see how the fight pans out. It's going to be very interesting to see just how well Malorum does against Ferrus, and also just how skilled Ferrus is now that this is really going to be the first lightsaber fight he's had probably since he was in the Jedi Order. I'm fairly sure that would be the case, because I know there's not been any lightsaber duels in Last of the Jedi so far. So it's going to be very interesting to see how our first lightsaber duel for Last of the Jedi. It may even be our only one. I know in Darth Plagueis, there was only one lightsaber duel really, which was between Plagueis and Venemus. So it's going to be interesting to see how this fight pans out, see how well Ferrus is, and how good Malorum is. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about because this really is connected to the next chapter, which I haven't read yet. I'm hoping to read it in a moment though, so yeah. Not really much else to say really. Thank you all for watching, I guess, and goodbye. Hello, so we've got another short chapter to really talk about here, which is chapter 20 of The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. Well, the death on Naboo has happened. And we've had the duel between Ferrus and Malorum, and this chapter's literally entirely... this entire chapter is pretty much just Ferrus and Malorum. Now, Ferrus is actually quite startled by the fact that Malorum even has a lightsaber, because even though he and Obi-Wan had felt he was Force sensitive, he didn't expect him to be proficient enough to wield a lightsaber, to be proficient with a lightsaber. And where he was and Malorum holds it in a classic stance, and then Malorum charges, and they start clashing and fighting, and Ferrus analyses how Malorum's fighting. And he's watching for weaknesses and ticking them off in his head. And he sees that Malorum's relying on agility but has little grace. He had strength but did not know how to use it effectively. But most of all, and this is what Ferrus was sure would defeat him, Ferrus could feel Malorum's emotion in his style. Anger fueled his attacks. It was a mistake many made, not a Jedi. And after many feints and attacks, they stop and come towards the laser gates. Which is of course where Qui-Gon had died, and Ferrus is pierced with an emotion of sympathy. And for Obi-Wan, as for the past few weeks he has been intimidated by Obi-Wan and irritated by his silences and upset at his decisions. But now he just realises, oh, I understand so little about about all the pain he's gone through. And he just says, I can't imagine what he's seen, how he's suffered, what he's lost. And he makes it through the first energy gate, but then they buzz out, and Malorum's in the next chamber ahead. And he just says, and he's able to make out Malorum's words, and he says, you can't stop me, you can only slow me down. And Ferrus, being Ferrus, has a snarky remark and says, oh, I'll stop you even though I'll miss our conversations. And Malorum nearly takes off Ferrus's arm when the next energy gate shuts off. And Ferrus has to leap back to
make sure his arm doesn't get cut off. And Malorum says, "I've learned from the best." Ferrus starts listing some Jedi and just says, "You don't know what the best is." And then he starts taunting Malorum, saying, "You want to be a Sith? Is that it? Is that it? Palpatine's puppies tired of biting ankles?" It works. Malorum's it filled with rage now, and the dark side starts swirling around him, and they go back out onto the catwalks, and they fight furiously now, and Ferrus can tell that Ferrus is wondering if Malorum was trying to head for an exit, and he knew if Malorum was able to get out of here, he would lose him. And it was almost as if Malorum knew the way and was trying to lead Ferrus on. And the book even says maybe he was trying to lead him back to the Imperial army, hoping they were still fighting. And they're fighting furiously, and they fight around the deep central core, and Ferrus uses his advantage of force agility and to leap and somersault, giving some power to his thrusts, and saving kicks and elbows for when he needs it, and when Malorum wouldn't be looking for it, and he's able to push Malorum back, and he has to rely on his balance not to fall down into the pit, and Malorum twists and turns, and he's beginning to sweat. Ferrus sees his chance, and he leaves himself open for an attack, and of course Malorum can't resist that. He can't resist that, and he comes in, and Ferrus slams an elbow directly in Malorum's forehead, and then bashes his lightsaber out of his hand with his own lightsaber hilt. And Malorum just shouts, "No!" And he leaps up into the air to try and catch his lightsaber, and he starts trying to use the force to pull his lightsaber to him, and he's straining to do so. And Ferrus just thinks, "Don't strain," as he's making what's described as an elemental mistake of an early year Jedi, which is to strain. And he sees that Malorum's blinded by needs, and that if he lost the lightsaber he would be disgraced and they would never be a Sith. And Malorum's is just unable to pull off the manoeuvre. He's too blinded by need and strain. And the lightsaber drops, and Ferrus sees the desperation in Malorum's eyes as he falls down and down into the pit. Well, the panic in his eyes, as the book says. And then, at the last line of the book, of the chapter, and Obi-Wan's secret went with him. This was actually quite an interesting chapter. You can tell Ferrus is clearly a better duelist than Malorum. He knows a lot more about lightsaber combat than Malorum. But Ferrus is actually caught off guard by Malorum quite a few times. He's shocked at some of the manoeuvres that Malorum's doing. He's able to make the fights a lot harder than Ferrus was expecting. So it's quite interesting. So yeah. Again, not really a whole lot to talk about, because again, it is just a fight. It was an interesting fight though, and I like that we finally, 4 books into the series, almost halfway in the series, that we finally get our lightsaber duel. I think we've been waiting for a lightsaber duel, and even though we have had a lightsaber action, it's not necessarily the same as a lightsaber duel, is it? So it was quite interesting to have a lightsaber duel here. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the last chapter's like, how it ends off the book. because it's only about 6 or so pages long. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see just how the book ends off as well. I know Malorum does not come back. I know he doesn't come back. And I have a small idea of how the book may end, because I know Palpatine does contact Ferrus. So, yeah. And I know Ferrus also becomes a double agent for the Empire, so it's going to be interesting to see just how this progresses. But, yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 21 of The Last of the Jedi Death on Naboo, and I was wrong, there isn't 21 chapters, there are 22. So, Ferrus is walking back into the hangar, and Typho comes up and reassures him that his friends are safe before Ferrus can even ask. And the battle is over, and there are smouldering stormtroopers on the streets and fallen officers in the buildings where they've taken refuge. And Ferrus sees a blur of brown and blue as Trevor runs towards him, and he asks if he stopped Malorum. And Ferrus explains that he fell in the generator, and Solace goes, "The secret is safe, whatever it is." And Typho says that they'll have to clean up quickly, so that there is no trace of battle, because they've been monitoring the comm system, and there are Coruscant Imperial Control is trying to raise the battalion there, but they're getting no response, so they're sending the ship to investigate from a nearby system. And he says that it's time to blow the weapons cache. So Clive says to Ferrus, "Looks like we're up, mate," and he explains that it'll be a bit tricky, but he thinks he's got the explosives figured out so they can get out of there in time. And Ferrus just blinks at him and goes, "You think?" And Clive grins and says that Trevor gave him a few ideas. And Trevor says, "Don't look at me that way. I'm not coming with you this time. Do you think I'm crazy?" And so they start setting up the explosives, and everyone's been cleared out the hangar. Some of the ships have been gotten out by the pilots, but they need to keep some in there so it doesn't raise suspicion. And Clive says that the trick is to arrange the stuff in the centre so the shockwave goes down but not out. But there is a side wall where they have to place some explosives so they can destroy the Imperial headquarters. And he explains that Trevor set the alpha charges up so that there's no trace of the metal from them, and so it doesn't look like they set anything. So it doesn't look like they exploded anything themselves, and that it will work a bit, and that it will go one alpha charge to the next alpha charge to the next alpha charge until it gets so hot in the hangar that all the explosives explode. And he says it's going to be one crazy blow. And Ferrus keeps asking, "Clive, how are we getting out?" And Clive goes, "Oh, I have a plan." And he puts down the last alpha charge against the drum, and he sets it up, and he turns it on, and Ferrus goes, "Good." And then Clive says, "We run now." And they immediately start running, and Ferrus is cursing Clive in his head because he's one of those insane individuals that likes to live life on the edge of extreme danger, on the edge of death. And they get out of there in time, but they meet up with Typho, Solace, and the gang, and he explains that he's sorry about, and Ferrus says, "I'm sorry about the building. It was a gracious part of Thieves. It would take a long time to rebuild that hangar." And Typho says, "It is a thing. The people of Naboo are more important," and that's how we end off the chapter. The main thing I want to talk about is Clive, because that was you really just see Ferrus's frustration, because
he's asking, how do we get out in time? And Clive goes, oh, don't worry, I'll sort that out. And he sets the explosion up. And it's almost about to set off. And he goes, we run, now. And it's a lot... I know I probably didn't explain it very well, but, you know, it's a lot funnier in the book itself. And, because it is, like, literally the moment he sets up the charge, he tells Ferris what they're going to do to escape. It's the moment before it blows, really. So, it is funny to me. You really just see Clive's insanity here. It was very funny to me. And also, like, Trevor's remark of, don't give me that look, Ferris. And now, you know, even Trevor has a sense of, and, you know, Trevor's sense of self-preservation's coming in here. His keen sense of self-preservation. So, you know, it's quite good. It's got a bit of a fun chapter. So, yeah. I am going to be curious to see what the Empire would think of their hangar and quarters being blown up. Will they just think, oh, well, explosives just blew up? Or are they going to think that they may have rebelled? That there may have been a bit of resistance? Because it's... What do they think will have caused the explosion? You know? So, yeah, but... Anyway, I've got one more chapter, and I can go a bit more into detail on my thoughts on the book then, so thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just finished The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo, and I've read chapter 22. So, they've left Naboo, as it's urgent they leave immediately, and they're now at the Rainbow Nebula, somewhere between Naboo and nowhere. And they're refueling up, and Ferris explains that he's heard from Typho and the Empire is investigating. And it's clear that they're going to engineer a cover-up and that there will be no retaliation on Naboo. And it also appears Malorum died in the explosion, so he survived the fall. Clive goes, love it when a plan works like a well-timed chrono. And there's a pause. And no one knows where anyone's going, and Ferris offers for them to come and join him on his Jedi asteroid. And Trevor amends him, saying, you only have to navigate through an atmospheric storm to get there. And Ferris hopes, and Ferris says, each one of you is now an outlaw from the Empire. You'll need fresh tech stocks, a place to lie low. And he looks at Solace, and he hopes she had changed her mind, because she had said she didn't want to come. And she eventually says, alright, I'll come, but just to check it out. And Ollie looks at Keats and Cohen, and he explains that they've been talking and they want to return to Coruscant, but they'd be welcome to a place, but they would welcome a place that was quiet and they can make plans. And Clive says that he could use with the rest, and Solace says, you're going to come? I thought you were a solo act. And Clive says, you must be your sparkling personality. And that's when Ferris's comlink signals. And the hologram of Emperor Palpatine is there. And Ferris shows the message to his group. And Palpatine is saying, greetings, Master Olin, for I think you deserve that title. And he says that times have changed and that he's changed with them. And that he thinks Malorum was a bit too harsh on him and he wants to give him an official pardon on behalf of the Empire. And Clive immediately says to the message, hey, what about me? And Palpatine is issuing an invitation to Ferris for him to come and visit him on Coruscant, as he has an offer for him, and he will grant him safe passage there. And if his offer doesn't interest him, he may take his pardon and go. And that the offer will stand for 24 hours from receiving the message, and he hopes to see him soon, as they have much to discuss. And he says, until then, farewell. Ferris looks at the gang, and he says, so, what shall we do? Accept a date with the Emperor? And that's where we end off
The Last of the Jedi, Death on Naboo. I've enjoyed this book. I think so far my ranking for Last of the Jedi is Death on Naboo at the 1 spot for best, then The Desperate Mission, then Underworld, then Dark Warning. I really enjoyed Death on Naboo, and I like, also, strictly talking, Chapter 22. I like that Solace changed her mind. I think you can kind of see her starting to warm up a bit. She's no longer as focused on being just one specific thing, on doing one specific thing. So it's nice to see her starting to warm up a little bit, and that she's not just focused on being on, you know, people anymore, which are dead now. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what's the next plot for the next books will be, because all I know is that Ferris becomes a double agent for the Emperor. That's all I know. As well as him and Hydra going to Alderaan to hunt for Leia. That's all I know about the next books. I have no idea what's happening after that, so it's going to be interesting to see how this will progress. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the next couple of books. It's going to be, again, interesting to see what happens. So, yeah. Don't really have much else to say, really. Aside from, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. So, yeah. Thank you. Also, it's also going to be interesting to see if they have a multi-book storyline again, like they did with the Secret of the Skywalkers. So yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Okay, just one quick thing that I forgot to do for mention for my Chapter 22 review. The message from Palpatine did not go the way I expected. I thought it was going to be not a message, but just like a chat between Ferris and Palpatine. And I thought it would wind up being that he offers him to become an Inquisitor for the Empire, and that Ferris would consider it, and you go through options of, well, if I do this, I could get special intel for my little force and such. And then he accepts the offer, and that's where we were going to end the book. But that wasn't what it ended up being. It ended up being Palpatine offering him to come to Coruscant for a pardon and offer. And him and Ferris are asking his little gang as to whether they should accept the Emperor's state. So, but yeah, anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.